We're so grateful to have you, to have you with us as we launch the second webinar in a series of 3 conversations that we've dedicated to exploring the transformative power of collaboration. And you'll hear this as a theme from our office more and more. And for those of you just joining us and who were, in other words, they weren't on the last webinar, we designed this series with 3 interconnected objectives that we believe are really essential to our collective work at MIT. One is to bring us all together. You can kind of look around to see who's on the call today. You might see some familiar names and hopefully new names too. And it's to create space where we can connect as a community, united by common purpose and shared commitment. Secondly, to just take a moment to pause and reflect and step back from day to day and consider the deeper meaning of what we're building together and to learn from the excellent work our colleagues are advancing across the field. And 3, to showcase the progress we are making at MIT and to recognize and celebrate the tangible impact that emerges when we collaborate intentionally, purposely, and open up conversation about it as well. It really is an iterative process we've learned through our office. Throughout this webinar series, we're examining collaboration not as an abstract ideal, but as a practical and strategic imperative. And the forum gives us this opportunity to explore the genuine value proposition of collaboration. Where does it create opportunity and unlock potential while also honestly examining the challenges that we face in these processes? So our hope from today is that these conversations, that we deepen our understanding of what effective collaboration looks like, and we strengthen this in our work ahead. And so for the purpose of the day, we've put together this program that takes a deeper look into the climate impacts of building materials and really entering it though through scope 3 emissions, which we'll learn about shortly. So we nest the discussion first in an overview of how MIT is collecting and curating scope 3 emissions across many categories. And we then move to the city of Cambridge with a review of the regulatory environment that is evolving for embodied carbon, again, which you'll learn more about soon, in building materials, and then back to MIT as to what the process is to account for these emissions in our building design and material choices. I do want to note before I introduce the panelists, and this is really hot off the press for us, though it dates to January, is that as of January 2026, there is an embodied carbon intergovernmental coordinating council for the state of Massachusetts that submitted the state's first embodied carbon reduction plan, outlining a plan for reducing embodied carbon in state-managed construction projects. And so you'll hear about this. For those of you who've worked with us, we really look at all sustainability and climate issues through a lens of the role of the individual, the campus, the city, the state, the nation, and the globe. And now this is yet another example which absolutely fits into that approach, where now we're understanding what's happening at the state level. You'll hear more about what's happening at the city level today and the campus level. So that will have to be a future discussion with folks from the state. And I've asked Ellie, great, Ellie is putting a copy of that document in the chat for you. So we don't have an in-depth time to focus on that today, but I think it's a really important context as you hear from Nikhil and Renda at the city campus level. So with that, I would like to introduce the panelists and we'll jump in. So we've got Brian Goldberg with us. Many of you know Brian from our Office of Sustainability. He's the assistant director whose role, among other things, is to steer MIT's efforts to account for scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions. You'll hear more about that today. Brian's about 7 years or so into collecting this data for us. He also assists with developing and demonstrating solutions regarding how the campus can become more resilient and adapt to a changing climate. The next one is we've got Nikhil, and Nikhil Nadkarni is a senior climate program manager with the City of Cambridge's Office of Sustainability. And the sustainability, I think, as you may have heard last time, they work to cut greenhouse gas emissions, they support a just energy transition, and they too build resilience to climate impacts such as heat and flooding. Nikhil leads the office's climate energy team and oversees implementation of the Cambridge Net Zero Action Plan for buildings. And previously, Nikhil worked on the development of building decarbonization policies and programs in Cambridge. He also had worked with the city of Boston at one point. And we've been working with Nikhil for many, many years across from net zero to decarbonization and now to embodied carbon. And then you'll hear from Renda Gatas, and many of you also know Renda. She's a senior sustainability project manager in MIT Systems Performance and Turnover Group in the Department of Campus Construction. And the mission of that group is to develop and implement practices that improve the operation efficiency, of MIT building stock. And so, again, we've also been working with Renda for many years. She's been in her role since 2016 and previously actually worked in our office, and before the off sustainability, she also worked with MIT's concrete sustainability lab. So with that said, a couple of just logistics. If you have questions, please add those to the chat. The chat is just available to myself and the folks on the call in order to keep that your focus and attention on the speakers, and then we'll collect any questions that you have. We will review and share as many of the questions as possible, depending upon our time. But more importantly, even if you have questions that we don't have time to answer, we learn from your questions, and those will be shared with Brian, Renda, Nikhil, and myself to review. And lastly, we will be recording this in an effort to share with those who are unable to join today. And within a few weeks, we'll able to make that available on our website. So without further ado, Brian, please take it away.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you to those who are joining today. As Julie noted, MIT has been accounting for greenhouse gas emissions since 2014. And these greenhouse gas emissions, or GHGs, are gases such as methane and carbon dioxide. They trap heat in the atmosphere. And these are gases that can drive climate change. These emissions are organized into scopes based on their sources. Scope 1 are GHGs for example, from MIT's direct burning of natural gas for steam, electricity, and heat. And Scope 2 emissions are the emissions associated with the electricity MIT purchases from the public utility. So these Scope 2 emissions are accounted by the utility as Scope 1, but they're MIT Scope 2 emissions. MIT maintains an annual inventory accounting for our greenhouse gas emissions, primarily Scope 1 and 2. And this inventory is based on campus energy data, and it uses an international protocol. Compiling this requires a lot of collaboration across MIT. It requires gathering lots of energy from many energy consumption data from a bunch of partners, and then converting that data into greenhouse gas emissions. If you're interested to learn more, I think Ellie's going to put some links in the chat. You can visit our website where we have more information about the greenhouse gas inventory. And there also was a recent webinar in this series a few weeks ago exploring how MIT is collaborating with partners, including the city, to reduce some of these impacts. It's on our YouTube channel. In terms of Scope 3, as Julie noted, we've been working on this for a number of years, and then in 2021, MIT formally committed to accounting for Scope 3 emissions so that we as a community can better understand our impacts and enable reductions. Scope 3 refers to indirect greenhouse gas emissions, and this is on the right side of the slide. These are greenhouse gas emissions from an organization's value chain. Like purchased goods or business travel or waste disposal or construction-related materials, which we'll learn about more today. So in essence, Scope 3 is all the GHG emissions that are not directly generated on site in Scope 1 or purchased electricity for Scope 2. In terms of the Scope 3 estimate in 2025, we pulled all the work together and we were able to launch MIT's first Scope 3 dashboard. This dashboard tracks 7 categories of Scope 3 that are relevant to higher education. And this is using an international protocol. The dashboard provides estimates of each of these categories going all the way back to 2019. This annual transparent accounting gives the MIT community members, all of you, the data to to understand the emissions and to identify where might we have possible opportunities to reduce. And we've also found there have been quite a bit of classes and researchers who have begun to use this data as well to help inform the educational process. Our office works with a lot of partners, maybe some of you who are with us today, to gather this data. So thank you for working with us over the years to do this. The data is oftentimes annual spend data. We collect that data, organize it, and then convert it into greenhouse gas emissions using standard protocols. Each box in this image represents a different category of Scope 3, and it reflects the approximate size of the MIT's portion of Scope 3 emissions in that category. And this is for example of 1 year. This is a starting point. We're going to continue to refine and advance these methods, and as more granular data becomes available, these models and methods will improve. The Scope 3 dashboard is housed in MIT's Sustainability Data Pool. This is where the dashboard lives. It lives alongside other dashboards that some of you may be familiar with. We have a climate resiliency dashboard tracking our flood risks projected over time, and Energize MIT, a dashboard that's reporting on various energy consumption across campus. The sustainability data pool is fantastic. I think Ellie will put a link in the chat. This is a great resource. We invite you to dive into the pool. This data pool can help inform, it's already informing operational decisions on campus, and it's also being used widely by classes and faculty and research scientists. So let's take a quick tour of the dashboard. I'm going to use a video of the screen of the dashboard as opposed to jumping to the dashboard. So let's walk through and see what we can learn. So the dashboard itself contains a lot of tabs of information across the top. In the tab on the Scope 3 breakdown, you can see a year. You can select a different year and then see the relative emission contributions of each category. Purchased goods is typically an institution's largest category. Teaming with the vice president for finance, we've worked very hard over the past few years to assemble anonymized MIT spend across hundreds of commodities. And we've organized those commodities into buckets of reduction potential so that some like commodities like IT hardware and food, these are more actionable. They're more able to be reduced because there's many opportunities to reduce them, many substitutions and alternatives. Some items are harder to substitute. And then there's some items that are just not actionable at all, like lab safety systems. These are essential. We can't reduce or eliminate these. Capital goods is a category we're going to learn about much more today. This involves new construction and renovation and maintenance across campus. Waste is a category that uses weights instead of spend to estimate emissions. And then finally, we have travel, which reflects all of the reimbursed travel from across the Institute. The travel, for those interested in learning about how you can reduce emissions from travel, we actually have an offset page as well that I think Ellie can put in the chat. It's the travel offset program that was launched a few years ago. And then finally, all these methods are open sourced. So through the dashboard, we've created open source explanation of how these processes have been determined, the steps we've used. And these open source methods are already helping many other institutions accelerate their own accounting efforts so that we're leapfrogging each other and collectively advancing the field. So that's what the Scope 3 dashboard has. Today, we've covered two key terms already, greenhouse gas emissions, or GHGs. This refers to the atmospheric release of gases that can contribute to climate change. And we've also talked about Scope 3 emissions. These are the indirect emissions from an organization's value chain. And these are the activities that are not already covered by Scope 1 and 2. Moving forward after me, we're going to hear from Nikhil and Renda, who will talk through three additional key terms. Embodied carbon is the greenhouse gas emissions used to create a product like steel or concrete through the installation of that product in a building. Operational carbon is the energy that a building is using, the GHGs consumed during the operation of a building. And life cycle emissions puts these two together. Life cycle emissions puts embodied carbon together with operational carbon to create the entire life cycle of emissions for the use um, uh, and disposal and production of a product. And so Randa and Nikhil will talk more about that now. I'm going to hand back to Julie.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. For those of you who might be alum on the call or other, the sustainability data dashboard link that Ellie just shared is only available to MIT. Sorry, Nikhil. Only available to MIT.edu Kerberos users. So if you're trying to get into it, you won't have access to it. But if you are interested in learning more, you can just reach out to Brian. Okay, so without further ado, take note of these terms. And now we're going to transition from how we frame this and the extensive data collection process. It took us, again, many years in order to ensure deep data integrity and also be able to collect. One of the most important things for collecting this data is that we are able to collect the same data through the same mechanism, if you will, with extreme data integrity in order to replicate that year after year for consistency of, of reporting and use over time. And that also anticipates any evolution in the regulatory environment, like you're hearing as well. And that's boded well for us both on the GHG side for emissions as well as now on the embodied carbon. So without further ado, Nikhil, why don't you take it away?
Great. Thank you, Julie. Thanks for inviting me to join the conversation today. Thanks, Brian, for the great intro and great to be speaking with you on this important topic, Rhonda. Um, I'll note two things just before I dive in. It's a team effort here at the Office of Sustainability, so I'm speaking on behalf of thoughts from a lot of people that have gone into this. So if there's a question I can't answer, I'm happy to take it back to the team. And then, I think something you alluded to, Brian, the the oversight and the minimization of embodied carbon and how we address it as part of our climate action. We're very new in this space, right? We're very early in this space. And for us, as we think about how to um, minimize our carbon emissions as a community, as a city, we want to be a leader, but as I think you'll hear, we're newer at this than we are at addressing operational carbon from our energy use and fossil fuel use. So I think that's an important thing to recognize of where we are in this. So let's dive in. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about what the City of Cambridge's green building requirements are and how they applied to different projects, different building projects, and what the embodied carbon requirements are. I'll speak a little bit about how we got here and sort of how embodied carbon reporting requirements fit into our overall net zero goals. And I'll talk about implementation to date. Again, just a couple of years in and what we've observed, and then touch on our next steps going forward. So, Article 22, as it's officially called, is a part of the Cambridge zoning ordinance designed to promote environmentally sustainable and energy efficient design and development practices. And it effectively takes the form of green building requirements. So for any project in Cambridge, if it meets a certain threshold, these special permit is required, and that triggers the green building requirement. So that's new construction of 25,000 square feet or more, or major renovations where more than 50% of the gross floor area is being modified. And the green building requirements are in effect at sort of three stages of a building's of a project life cycle. So special permit, that's when the full application is submitted to the city, then the building permit application when the building's ready to go into construction, and then at certificate of occupancy. And at each of these stages, the building applicant has to submit a net zero narrative. Embodied carbon is within the net zero narrative, but it applies to a narrower subset, which I'll touch on in just a second. Next slide, please. So how did we get here? So The Net Zero Action Plan is Cambridge's framework for getting to net zero emissions in buildings by 2050 or earlier. And so it was first adopted in 2015, and it's updated every 5 years. And so embodied carbon really became an action in that first 5 year update in 2021. And before that, the Net Zero Action Plan focused exclusively on operational carbon emissions, right, from buildings, so fossil fuel use and electricity use. And, really through a stakeholder process, embodied carbon kind of rose up as an important focus of the Net Zero Action Plan. And so, following the adoption of that updated plan, in 2023, a zoning amendment came through City Council to add an embodied carbon reporting requirement to the green building requirements. And so the team here engaged with industry stakeholders, with the community, and developed a reporting policy that was finalized in 2024. Next slide, please. So what's required? So non-residential projects. So again, while the special permit applies to that kind of wider pool of building projects in Cambridge, the embodied carbon reporting is only applicable to non-residential projects that are over 50,000 square feet, and they're required to report on the embodied carbon um, through that net zero narrative, through the green building reporting requirements. And the intent of this policy is to collect enough data so that we can eventually set baseline targets for embodied carbon reduction. So that would be kind of the medium to long term goal. The Net Zero Action Plan also calls for policies to prioritize building reuse and minimize emissions in deconstruction. Next slide, please. So again, where we are is the reporting requirements have been implemented since 2024, since June 2024 specifically. And what's happened in that time is that Cambridge, like Greater Boston, has seen a significant slowdown in commercial real estate development. And so we've seen actually, fewer submittals than we would have seen in prior years. And so that has led to data collection for embodied carbon being more challenging or, at a slower pace than we might have expected. So to date, fewer than 5 projects have been required to complete the embodied carbon reporting requirement. And I'll just note that because it only applies to non-residential buildings, a lot of the vast majority of construction that has happened, the multifamily development, residential projects, aren't required to submit embodied carbon reporting, right? And it has to be a non-residential project. And so that's why we have just a few projects that have come through under the embodied carbon reporting requirement. But we continue to engage with industry groups such as the Carbon Leadership Forum. We're tracking other policy and industry developments. You heard about the work happening at the state level. We're also following what Boston's doing and the embodied carbon study happening for the 100 Home Project in Massachusetts. Next slide, please. And so looking ahead to next steps, first of all, in the city's own municipal building work, reducing embodied carbon is a goal that we're going to continue to examine and work on in future projects. I think also, looking back from 2021 to today, we have a lot more information on embodied carbon, right? We have more thought leaders in the space. There's more forums and industry networks to be a part of, and we're going to continue to stay plugged into that. And then we're actively in the process of updating the Net Zero Action Plan. And so this really provides us an opportunity to take the learning from industry, from observations over the past couple of years, and think about what our approach to embodied carbon in new buildings and renovated buildings should be in the next couple of years. So there's a lot more learning to do. And I think it's a topic that we're excited to continue to be plugged in on with our industry partners, peer cities, and state leaders. I'll wrap up there. Thanks so much.
Excellent. It's really helpful actually, Nikhil, in real time to get an update on where things stand. So appreciate you taking the time to share that with us, and I'm sure it will garner some interesting questions. Before we get into some Q&A, let's move to Renda. And I will say, having worked with Renda for so long now, and with Renda's eye on the ball of what's happening both on campus and in the city, has really kept us both informed, and prepared for the evolution at the state and city, and now campus level. So Renda, thanks again for taking the time to do this. Take it away.
Thank you. Happy to be here. So, what I wanted to do is first ask why we're doing this. Why are we talking about embodied carbon? Um, the embodied carbon accounts for 11% of global GHG emissions. That's specifically on building materials and construction. We're not talking building operations. And it's estimated that by 2060, we will be building approximately 2.5 trillion square feet based on how we're building today. So what does that mean? That's equivalent to an entire New York City every 34 days for the next 40 years. That's a lot of building, and that's a lot of building materials. So if we don't address embodied carbon in a different way, or if we don't build differently, embodied carbon and operational carbon by 2050 will be equivalent, because we spend embodied carbon upfront when we build the building, because it's tied to the products we put into the building. Next. So how do we account for embodied carbon? We use life cycle assessments. We do them at the product level, and that's accounted for. You document that through EPDs, environmental product declarations, and then there's whole building life cycle assessments. And whole building life cycle assessments exist at multiple scopes. So you have the product stage, which is defined as A1 to A3, cradle to gate. Some people may have heard that term. And it's really all about the products in the building. And then there's upfront emissions, which captures transportation of materials to the construction sites and construction activities. And then there's the cradle to grave scope, which goes all the way to end of life and includes operations. Next. So I'm not going to talk to the city of Cambridge or the Commonwealth. You've heard a lot about what we're doing, but I did want to, I guess, just break out this whole notion of embodied carbon in three ways. Like the way people are thinking about it, or at least the way I see we're thinking about it, is in terms of addressing it through life cycle assessments and reductions through, usually it's percent reduction of embodied carbon. Then there's another way called GWP limits on materials, which is specific. You address a specific material and you require it's tied to buy clean regulations. I mean, there's other states that have already done that. So you might say, I don't want concrete with a higher GW potential of this much. And then the other is through reuse. So those are the three categories I think you're seeing from a regulatory space. So, and actually industry space. So let's go to the next slide. So I was going to talk about, this is a slide, it's a timeline that shows industry leadership. It doesn't capture everything. It only captures it's the way I see how the development of this space has happened. But also I'm trying to capture some key moments in the timeline. And mainly because I think with embodied carbon, things have scaled more rapidly than typical in the construction space. So what I mean by this, I mean, I was in practice for 13 years prior to joining MIT. I don't remember ever hearing the word embodied carbon. And then in I think 2009, 2010, the Carbon Leadership Forum developed. And that's when that discourse started to happen. And a couple of years later, Architecture 2030, which had already developed, a net zero target by 2030, released the challenge for products for embodied carbon. So that was the first time that we started looking at that. And then USGBC released LEED v4. Now there's been other LEEDs, versions of LEED, but LEED v4 I think was really important because it initiated the discussion of the impact of building materials and really pushed the notion of transparency around around environmental impact, health, and sourcing. But we're talking about environmental impact here. So, when LEED v4 came, everyone's going, "Oh my God, how are we going to collect this EPDs and HPDs?" They were hard to come by. And we were struggling in our projects, we were asking for them, but we were struggling to collect the number that was required. And that was back in 2013, 2014. I think we started using it in 2014. And so it took a while for manufacturers to really start to be willing to disclose the impacts and also the material ingredients. There was a resistance in the beginning, but it started to happen. The more we asked, the more we saw change. And then in 2018, when you think about embodied carbon, initially it was all about structure and enclosure. So the envelope or the facade in other terms, and the structure. So the structural engineers came out with a challenge. So they came out with a 2050 challenge to reduce embodied carbon. So to go to net zero, and that was important. To get the engineers on board was really important. And then the zero carbon certification came along, and the zero carbon certification is by the International Living Future Institute. And the International Living Future Institute is a very aspirational certification, but they had not targeted embodied carbon until now. Like, it was about healthy materials, it was about energy and water, and this came out, and suddenly there was a way for industry to grapple with embodied carbon in a different way through the certification. And they also, it's a unique certification because they provide support for project teams. So that was 2018, and a few years later, with COVID in between, the MEP industry realized, oh, we also have an impact. We need to do something about it. So they also galvanized around it, and they created the 2040 challenge. And while all this was happening, everyone's releasing EPDs, and there's LCAs starting to be conducted, but they're all kind of all over the place. People were using different tools, different methodologies, different boundaries, different scopes. And so it was a royal mess, as they would say. So the carbon leadership essentially convened all the industry players, among them the ones on this slide, and created the ECHO harmonization. It's called the ECHO Embodied Carbon Harmonization and Optimization Project. And it's all about creating consistent methodologies and reporting frameworks for embodied carbon. And it's all the organizations working together to make this happen. At the same time, a year later, this was in 2024, ASHRAE started to develop this what's called the 2040P draft standard, and they released a draft standard in 2024, and it's targeting both operational carbon and embodied carbon. And I'll talk about the last thing I want to talk about is LEED v5 was released last year, and the reason I think LEED as a certification is both does two things. One, has always been, its goal was to drive market change. And I think that's what it's done in industry. And also it has a regulatory component. It's not just in Cambridge where it's part of the regulatory component, it's in many cities that have adopted LEED. So it has a significant impact. And what it did is that it requires embodied carbon as, it requires conducting a life cycle assessment as a basic prerequisite. Anyway, so next. So what are we doing? So we started integrating life cycle assessments, I think back in 2018. It was pretty early, and these are two of the projects, but actually we did it in the first three was Schwartzman, Met, and Music. And we aligned it with LEED. At that point, LEED was in focus. I mean, they were talking about embodied carbon, but the original LCA targeted all the different metrics in life cycle assessments, including eutrophication, ecotoxicity, ozone depletion potential, a whole bunch of other metrics. So anyway, so we started by doing them and trying to see what we could do. And then next slide. 2019, I think this B55 came online, and we said, okay, we really need to understand embodied carbon better. So we decided to go for the ILFI zero carbon certification. And we are now zero carbon ready, we just completed the performance period, and we're going to be submitting for certification. The performance period is primarily for operational carbon. But we meet all the targets. So we've met the requirements and the targets. It's a very aspirational, and that there's a new update to the zero carbon certification now, but back then it was a very aspirational certification. And one of the things that we learned pretty early on is that we all were learning. Like the design teams, this was a unique project. We were renovating a small part of the bottom of the green building, as well as putting an addition. So from a life cycle assessment, it was a complicated project to do a life cycle assessment for. The CM, and the subs weren't very versed in this space. And I would say the subs hadn't asked the supplier, and the supplier didn't have any low embodied concretes back then, and we had to go up the chain of command to find concrete that had a 60% reduction. So it was a really, there was a lot of learning. We had to test the concrete to make sure it worked the way we needed it to work. There was a lot of learning back then. And, we were using proprietary materials. We had to sign NDAs for the concrete that we were using. So it was really interesting process, a great learning process for everyone on the team. Next. So what are we doing today? So based on B55, we recently completed it. And based on what's happening in industry, we've been developing the embodied carbon framework. We have a draft, we are piloting it. Some of the key things we try to do as part of the embodied carbon is align it with the regulatory frameworks that are the local regulatory framework. We also are trying to align it with the green building certifications. That is like LEED v5 and the new version of ILFI zero carbon. But we're also trying to make it future-proof for 2040p, the ASHRAE standard, and the Eco Harmonization Project. So that was a key goal, while aligning it with our fast forward goals and our climate action planning. The other thing is it provides a kind of unified workflow for design teams and a unified methodology for reporting internally. So we can compare apples to apples, because what we learned with our initial LCAs, we were getting so many different ones and they were all done differently and we couldn't compare them. Like we didn't have consistent methodologies to compare them. So I think it operates at 3 levels. It has reduction targets. It also looks at material specific limits. And finally, it also starts to address reuse. So, and we're in pilot stage. So we're hoping to pilot it in our new projects as they come online. And that's it. Thank you.
That's excellent, Renda. Some excellent visuals as well. I can't wait to go back to. Before we jump into some questions, and now that you've all listened to one another, I just want to ask if anyone has any like follow-up thoughts or something they said, oh, I wish I had added this. Not a requirement, just Brian or Nikhil, now that you've heard from Renda and vice versa. Renda, anything that you want to respond to really quickly?
No.
No. Brian, is that it? Go ahead.
Um, yeah, I think hearing Nikhil and Renda, I think the word I keep hearing, and we find it in our Scope 3 accounting, is that this is all in progress, that we are all continuing to learn and we're all continuing to advance. And so that's what's exciting, but it's also unnerving. And I just just acknowledge that because this is sometimes we don't always know how it's evolving because a lot of this is on the front line of emerging. And
Yeah.
it's exciting, but it seems like it certainly this is a space within Scope 3 more generally that we're all learning and very rapidly making progress.
Brian, I'm going to add to that is that for those of you on the call, some of you on the call we've known for many years and you've worked closely with our teams and so on. Others may be new. And I think what's so interesting, and just to take note, if you're just coming into this arena with us, is that a sustainability office is tends to its role is to manage all of the social, all of the environmental, you know again, I'm going to say this very broadly, impacts, if you will, climate. Uh, I won't go into all the pieces and the intersection with people and so on, but it's all in a non-regulatory environment. And all of the work that we've done, is to anticipate how might some of the issue areas like greenhouse gases, like embodied carbon emissions, eventually potentially be regulated. And so it puts us in the space because we're so forward thinking, and that's how we've positioned the office for the past decade plus, is that as I hope you hear the tone, and here we are with the city of Cambridge and our team here, is that we're not being reactionary. This has been building. We've been keeping an eye on this. You can hear Renda's been looking at industry, at standards for over a decade. And similarly, as we anticipated, the city would, as well. So I think, that takeaway is the unique role of an office, the value proposition to the campus and to all of you on the call is really we really work on staying ahead of the curve, and we really take pride, if you will, in not being reactionary. And it really enables us, I want to circle this back to the role of collaboration, to lean into collaborations with the city of Cambridge, with Boston, and with the state, all of whom we have extremely positive working relationships in this area. So with that as a transition, maybe I'll come back to you, Nikhil, then, and just say, again, leaning into these times of collaborations, which I think we all believe are more important than ever. And that came across on the other call with the chief climate officer from Cambridge, Julie Wormser, in the last meeting, is and Nikhil, I think you and I intersected again. I don't know how long it's been, but over, almost a decade ago around net zero action planning, over many years. And so what lessons in collaborating has this process reinforced for you representing the city of Cambridge?
Yeah, thanks. No, thanks for raising that question, Julie. I think the development process of the embodied carbon reporting requirements within Article 22 is really the product. It's not something that the staff on our team is going to develop in a vacuum by any means, right? It's really a
Right.
product of collaboration. And so I think in that process, we worked with developers, we worked with architects, we worked with green building professionals. And I think, reflecting on what you said, I think it's really fortunate for a place like Cambridge to have so many thought leaders, right? Such as at MIT, across higher ed, in our green building professional community, in the developers. And so, we're really fortunate to be able to work on these things together
Hmm.
within Cambridge, to bring that thought leadership, to bring the leadership on climate action, to develop to kind of to start to push the envelope on these things, right? And then I think kind of scaling beyond that, I think one of the things that our chief climate officer really values and has really, pushed our team to do is how do we take what we're doing here and scale it to other communities and, in the region and across the country. And so, we really want to be taking the things that we're working on here and scaling, right, by sharing outwards as well. So I see collaboration as, as a couple of different levels. And I think that's going to be really important going forward. I mentioned the, net zero action plan work, and that's going to similarly involve working with a lot of stakeholders, with a lot of residents to think about how do we work on reducing greenhouse gas emissions in Cambridge, and how do we do that in a way
Yeah.
that's demonstrates leadership. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Nikhil. Brenda, I want to bump this over to you for a moment. Is that with your years of experience in this topic, you've really become our one of our own in-house uh, experts, as an implementer, if you will, on our front. And can you talk through what some of the emerging practices and advances in this space that I'm going to ask it in two ways. Find most interesting because you've really watched this evolve. I mean, keep in mind for those of you on the call, like Renda, you were asking these questions in your role as a researcher in the Sustainability Concrete Hub, looking at materials. So this has not been new to you. You didn't have to, all of a sudden learn a new skill set. You've been doing this for a very long time, applied to different materials. So I'd be curious what you find most interesting. Is there something that, as an advisor to our office in this realm that we should be keeping our eye on?
So I actually think one of the more interesting spaces in the field is what's
Uh-huh.
happening with the end of life component for
Oh,
building
mhm.
materials. So, I mean, there's a lot to with new materials. Like, a lot of interesting things there, but the world of deconstructing, recycling, and reuse is going to change how we do buildings. In a I at least I think I've been
Yeah.
attending meetings with the Carbon Leadership Forum reuse group, the one in Boston, for some time now, participating in that. And it's really cross industry collaboration. A lot of times what you find is like architectural 2030s for architects, SE 2040 is for structural engineers. This is for this. But this one, you know, uh, everybody's involved, DEP is involved, institutions are involved, manufacturers are involved, and contractors and architects, and everyone's trying to figure it out because it requires us to change the way we design our buildings. Like, we have to think
Mm,
differently about design, and we have to think differently about what does it mean to design for deconstruction, and what does
mm,
it mean to create a circular economy that's not just pure input and then you let it go. How do you bring it back? How do you bring things back? And it's been fascinating to be in those, how do we do our drawings differently? How do we deliver our projects through in this construction process differently? Who are the players? What is the market change that needs to happen? There's a whole space of post almost space that hasn't developed, which is around what do you do with this material that is
mm,
after it's been removed from a building. And I think either becoming a new material or being reused in a different way. And that space is fascinating. I think that's where I'm really excited.
I think I hear a new with Ellie and Susie online, a new research assistant uh, project that we should take note of as we continue to engage students in this realm. I have one more question for Brian. I'm going to check in with Ellie to see as we wrap up if there's any questions from the audience. Remember, you can add questions into the chat, even though you can't see all the questions, they get sent and we can have a chance to review them. Let me ask for each of you, what area do you seek? Again, I want to lean back into the content. As you can hear, this is a very collaborative arena with embodied carbon, as you've heard from all of the speakers. So as you look ahead, and I'll start with you, Brian, which areas in which you're working related to this embodied carbon area, or even more broadly for you, Brian, around scope 3, where might you seek more assistance in collaboration as we look to the next phase of things? So first, Brian, same question for all of you. First, Brian, then Renda, then Nikhil.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And yeah, more broadly, with MIT's efforts to account for our Scope 3 emissions, we're seeking a lot of collaborations in the space of kind of technology and sustainability, artificial intelligence and sustainability, cloud computing and sustainability, trying to understand the
Mhm.
intersection of as these fields
Mhm.
grow, what does that mean for our own ability to measure these impacts and then account for
Mhm.
them and seek reductions? And we're finding a lot of alignment with our peers who are all asking, our peer institutions are all asking the same questions. And that's where the
Mm.
collaboration opportunities have been really rich.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Yes. And for those of you on the call, Brian's heavily involved in looking at peer institutions with this very robust Ivy Plus group and also involved in the International Sustainable Campus Network. I believe you're on that working group now as well, which is an international group of universities looking at these same questions. So thanks. Renda, on your end?
I think it goes back to for me, because of the implementation aspect of the work that I do, I'm I'm looking for collaboration just with industry in general, with new methodologies for
Mm,
um, doing things that we still don't know how to do. I mean, I think talking about the deconstruction component again and reuse and recycling, that's a space that it'd be interesting to see the kind of collaborations that will come out of that. Right now, uh, that's, for example, in the reuse group, we're trying to figure out, oh, can we collaborate on different ways to do this with, be it
mm,
CMs, with, how do we do this differently?
mhm,
Either our design teams, our CMs, our manufacturers, et cetera, et cetera. And then also, like, how do we bring innovation that's already happening uh, in other places here? For example, I recently sat in a meeting where someone presented on how in New York they brought infinite recycled technologies to New Jersey. And what infinite recycled technologies does, it recycles glass out of curtain wall. So it will dismantle the
mm,
entire curtain wall. And
mm,
New York, it's all towers. Not all, but you know what I mean. There's a lot of towers. So, and it turns it into raw material for fiberglass, for other things. And it will also dismantle the aluminum it's not just the glass. It will dismantle the
mhm,
entire curtain wall and find a place for it in the supply chain. So we're going to need collaborations with the state in terms of bringing new method people like that to help us be able to do this because we can't do this here now because we can't transport it all the way to New Jersey, right? So it's not an
mm,
option. So we need new collaborations and we need new um with manufacturers or even with new technology that is and with the recycling and reuse
mhm.
organizations to kind of bring people here so we can do more.
It's really thoughtful. Yeah, I think again, I'm so grateful that we've been able to have this conversation today because we haven't all paused to think about what's next because we've been very focused for many, many years on collecting the data correctly. So that's excellent. Thank you. You get the last word, Nikhil, and then we're wrapping up.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be brief. I mean, I think, there's the collaboration in kind of learning from industry and industry professionals and innovators. I think
Hmm.
that's really important in how, policymakers can be informed by sort of uh, what's happening in the field.
Hmm.
And then the other thing I'll say is, I mean, one of the pleasant surprises about this is how many other communities are working on this, right? So Boston's been working on embodied carbon policy. Newton has been. And, I kind of see on the decarbonization side, in the adoption of advanced building codes and stuff, we've always had there's sort of a momentum, right, of communities adopting this together. Cambridge is one of 10 communities that has fossil fuel free requirements for most new buildings. And so I think any sort of, as we look towards future policy development, we want to make sure we're aligned and working in concert with other communities in the space.
Great. Well, we're just at 1 o'clock. Thank you all for joining us. Join us for the next webinar series that will be hosted by our colleague Susie Jones, entitled The Plate and the Planet, MIT's Integrative Approach to Sustainable Food Systems. That will be on Friday, April 3rd from 12 to 1.